Good morning, Prof. Reiko Yamada. Good morning, Prof. Reiko.
Hello, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, yes. So we have another 4 minutes to go. Okay, 4 minutes to go. Yeah. So now we have one more presenter, Dr. Kai. Yeah. I think she will join the she will join us after this.
Doctor, just want to update. We as secretary already contact Dr. Kai. It's just that we're still waiting for her response.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thanks for the update, yes.
Doctor and all, for waiting the session to start, maybe we can take one photo as a retrial first. Okay,
yes, sure. Yes.
Can I see your smile in this morning first? Okay. I will count for until 3. Okay, Prof. Halima,
Okay,
thank you so
yes.
much. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much to see your smile.
Sarah, you also can take photo from time to time, you know. So.
Okay, Doctor, noted.
Yeah, so yeah. Okay, good morning to everyone. Now it's already 9:30. So before we start the section, allow me to introduce myself first. I'm Dr. Thien Lei Mee from School of Educational Studies in USM, Universiti Sains Malaysia. I'm the moderator for this section. So we have 4 presenters. So each presenter you will be given about 30 minutes. 20 minutes for presentation, followed by 10 minutes Q&A. So now let's welcome our first presenter. She is Professor Dr. Miki Sugimura. So the title for her presentation is Future Workforce and Role of Higher Education for a Sustainable Society, Berlin Declaration for ESD and its Commitment. So, Prof. Miki, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your kind introduction to me, Dr. Thien Lei Mee. I'm very honored to be included here and appreciate the IPPT and Ministry of Higher Education and also the Secretary of Global Higher Education Forum. Today's my topic is Future Workforce and Role of Higher Education focusing on the sustainable society. Actually, now the international society has been discussing the SDGs and the education for sustainable development. Last May, UNESCO had a very big conference focusing on the ESD, and they also declared a very important mission called the Berlin Declaration. Today, I'd like to focus on those points and try to think about what's the role of higher education while the COVID-19 situation is still very, very difficult. This is the outline of my presentation. So first of all, just to introduce some background and purpose of this presentation. And after that, try to clarify some rationales why we need to think about the research on ESD at higher education sector and the research question. And now my institute, Sophia University and International Christian University in Japan has been joining the OECD project focusing on the learning outcome assessment. So I try to just to introduce those outline, and finally also try to introduce some case study of ESD at higher education in my class. Before starting, we must say now we need to rethink or reshape the internationalization of higher education. Last decades, of course, we're very focusing on this area, and many universities in the world has been made efforts to be internationalized more. Last year, as you know, COVID-19 started, and we have been very difficult situation, struggling in how we can keep our good qualified education research and how we cannot stop the student learning. This is a very brief idea, but after the internationalization, now many universities facing on the online or hybrid education. But my point of view, maybe before the COVID-19, some people or some academia has already started to discuss, rethink and reshape internationalization, because now we have a lot of issues. For example, quality assurance, or how we can harmonize the international program, and how we can promote the real qualified student exchange or student learning outcome. Learning output or outcome should be very important topic even before the COVID-19. So that's why I just started this project. Last year, the UNESCO has already published one very important book called Education in a Post-COVID World. This report points out the 9 important missions, how we can think about the reshape and reconstruct our education sector. This report focuses not only higher education, but also the whole sector of education. But from here, we must think, how do we or do you think about the disparities in various societies, inclusion, equality, and equity? Those targets are already discussed in the Sustainable Development Goals. And what should education do for that? And what role should international higher education take? The internationalization has been accelerated for last decades, but as I already told you, there are a lot of issues on the quality assurance, or sometimes socio-cultural conflict, or sometimes a more competitive, more acceleration of the ranking system or something. Of course, they are very good initiative for us to elaborate the good higher education sector. But at the same time, when we think about how we can nurture the future workforce for our next world after the post-COVID-19, we need to think about more inclusion, equity, or qualified education. Now UNESCO proposed this idea is transformative education. SDGs goal for education, as I don't have to say at this moment, but if I can repeat it, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunity for all. Especially target 4.7 includes a lot of very important norms, and topics and agenda which we should consider in a higher education sector. Education 2030, now this is a target year of SDGs and ESD. This framework of action also pointed out the importance of a sense of urgency to a single renewed education agenda that is holistic, ambitious, and aspirational, leaving no one behind. Last May, UNESCO had a very big international conference focusing on the ESD. The Berlin Declaration was proposed in this conference at the end of the day. ESD in SDG target 4.7, I have already mentioned it, as an enabler for all SDG 70 goals. So now it's ESD has been more focused by many sectors because it is a foundation for the required transformation to provide everyone with knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes, and enables learners to develop their cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Today, I'd like to focus this point. For example, critical thinking, competence for collaboration, problem solving, coping with complexity and risks, building resilience, thinking systematically and creativity or creatively. These points now a very necessary point for us to think about, reshape or rethink of the internationalized program. Of course, we need to empower learners to take responsible action as citizens, especially global citizens, and try to fulfill their right to quality education. In that mean, UNESCO's another report focusing on the roadmap of ESD, a very, very good orientation for us to rethink our higher education sector. Pedagogy and learning environment, societal transformation, learning outcomes, and learning content. These 4 points should be combined for us to rethink our more qualified and good international program. ESD has been developed at primary and secondary level a lot. Many countries, the basic education has been focusing on the ESD already. For example, in Japan, we have a lot of UNESCO school. This is a kind of a nickname, but the some schools who have sympathy with the UNESCO's mission on the education for sustainable development, a lot of practices on ESD has been already conducted as a primary and secondary level in Japan. But to tell the truth, at the higher education sector, still ESD has been just started to be discussed because ESD is more focusing on the kind of environmental studies or sometimes integrated studies, and these are topics on the basic education in the world. On the other hand, of course, higher education has a very important role of promoting the research or each special areas. But now ESD finally has been discussing in the higher education sector, and we need to think about how we can more qualify and transdisciplinary, or how we can marginalize people's activities more empowered. Those points should be included in ESD at the higher education. Now you can see some points of the important point of higher education sector, which are proposed on the Futures of Education, the update progress report. This report was presented in last May at the same time at the Berlin conference. And Futures of Education, as you know, this is a mid-term or long-term report by UNESCO, which is still under preparation, and the target year is 2050. But they also focus on the role of higher education there. There are several points in strengthen knowledge and education as a global common good, and teacher education, initial training and ongoing professional development. And of course, we need to think about the research and circulation of knowledge for the policy making or strengthening or pedagogical innovation. So taking these points consideration, we need to think about the 4 maybe dimensions: virtual learning under COVID-19 or international cooperation still, program and provider mobility, but also the global competency and development evaluation of learning outcome. Also very, very important when we think about this is a very, very kind of new normal transformative learning. So these are rationale for my current project. Of course, social and economic factors, as I already told you, this come from the ESD or SDGs, but the institution level, each institute, the accountability of higher education, and also pedagogical factors, equitable qualitative learning in higher education, creating and evaluating the 21st century skills now on the stage on the higher education. This is a 21st century skills as a very important point of workforces, and now many industrial societies, not only academia, those companies or some international organization or some societies groups requires many next generation to get those kind of skills or willingness or ability. In that sense, maybe we can think about technical skills, social and behavioral skills, and creativity and critical thinking skills. So our research question might be, so what kind of learning outcome evaluation index and teach evaluation model are effective for realizing these kind of tasks of visualization of learning outcome in the quality assurance approach of higher education? OECD has already focused on this point, and they started a very big international project since 2019. At this moment, about 20 universities in the 11 countries join here. And as I already told you, the International Christian University in Japan and the Sophia, my university, join here. We are now conducting a very big comparative education study focusing on the creativity and critical thinking. This research is still under conduction, so sorry, today I cannot explain about the result of this research, but next year we can summarize the 3 years project. On the other hand, today I'd like to just introduce this OECD rubric on the creativity and critical thinking. Now, OECD headquarters trying to put this trial, the rubric, and each member university have been using this rubric to evaluate student learning outcome, especially focusing on the creativity and critical thinking. International Christian University of Sophia has been involved in this trial examination, and we are now pick up some classes to assess those points. Of course, we have a lot of issues because from European countries or East Asian countries or some American countries, North American countries, each universities have a different cultural background, and they have a different kind of a categorized concept on these points. So we are still trying to reform this rubric, but the main point are here: inquiring, imagining, doing, and reflecting. So today, one of the case study, I'm also now involved in this project. So just to introduce a very, very simple but qualitative approach, the case studies of ESD at higher education. This is the kind of the Khayriyyah, the learning development education. And as I already told you, the indicators related to the evaluation learning outcomes by the OECD as a very holistic but very complicated. So that's why we can pick up some elements. The subject observation was an undergraduate course, International Pedagogy, International Education, conducted at this Sophia University for this spring semester. And this class was attended by 140 undergraduate students there from different backgrounds, including the science and technology students. The activity was used as a teaching material for development education, And it is an activity that sort of 16 pictures and think about what the situation or if I cannot go to school raises. It affects various aspects of life and the chain of poverty. So that's why I ask the student to think about what kind of the correlation, cause-effect relationship among those 16 pictures. Of course, students can add some more point if they like. As a result, you can see the first and foremost, the pattern is that as a result of rearranging each element, the cause of not being able to go to school is that it makes a round and returns. This is a very, very majority opinions. There are various ways to write. For example, right side, this student just a line, linear expression. But anyway, next third, students trying to express their ideas on the round. And another first student's case wrote a different causal relationship as shown in the figure on the right. Sorry, these are written in Japanese, so I'm very sorry. But, you can just enjoy how the students can try to reshape and rethink about the global issues, the causal and effect relationship. The left side, the fifth case is also related to the fact that the last event returns to the start after writing flow from cause to effect. But the sixth example on the right, however, writes a similar cycle, but points out that the causal relationship can be grasped more complicatedly, and a triple negative cycle can be created there. And furthermore, on the seventh student on the left side, this is very, very funny. The students maybe might swear to express his very, very embarrassed feeling and complexity and difficulty of the situation. But finally, the eighth student on the right side is trying to explain for each element how those elements is linked to politics, economy, health, hygiene issues. And what's even more interesting is that the students point out the importance of cultural relativism. Of course, not going to school is a not good phenomenon. So many Western countries think about, okay, we need to, everyone should be fulfill their educational opportunities. But this student says, children sometimes, some culture, some social fact affect the children must help their parents. If they have those kind of norms, maybe we need to think about those kind of cultural differences. Sometimes going to school is the right things to do, but the other time might not. So the students just mention it. The student also points out the difficulty of changing negative change, where the cause of the problem is ironically the result of the same time. These student activities can tell us very interesting how the student can try to get that kind of the, learning outcome, especially the critical thinking. Now I picked up some comments from my class, but the first students pointed out the difficulty of the chain property, and second student also various factors of the intervene, and also some students simply building a school and increasing education opportunities are not solving the problem. On the other hand, some another students point out, I thought it was necessary to consider the historical, political, and cultural context, or reconsider how happy I am, because comparing with those countries, now we are here, and my university students felt, yes, I can learn here at the university. And some students also try to think about these problems should be related to my life. Those are very, very important point of ESD. And so that means we need to clarify those analytical points of student comment, because cause and effect, it's a spiral and no particular order of correct answers in the chain. But we are not able to find a good solution at this moment yet. because negative change are not just a problem in developing countries, but also the developed countries also faces these issues. So finally, students are required to try to think issues, problems that are directly related to their own life. So this is a very, very simple case study, but how we can try to create a more critical thinking learning activities. So from this year and next year, we're still continuing joining the OECD project, and also some qualitative and quantitative research is conducting, and try to clarify how the student learning outcome can be more qualified and equitable learning for transformative learning. So if I can repeat it, the very declaration, especially our commitment, you can see, especially for 1 and C section, try to emphasize on the cognitive skills, social and emotional learning, and action competencies for the individual and societal dimensions of transformation, promoting individual behavioral change and sustainable development, equality, and respect of human rights. Those points are closely related to the roadmap of ESD. So that's why today I'd like to introduce these points. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Miki. So now I would like to open the Q&A section to the floor. Yeah, is there any questions that the participants wish to ask Prof. Miki for further information about a very interesting topic? Yes, please.
I had a question, which I wrote in the chat. Thanks for the talk. That's really interesting and very, I think, sobering understanding. I mean, because we think of education as the great equalizer. And I mean, I was able to only catch the second half of your talk, but it seems that that's not the case. And not only is education not enough to get people out of poverty, but I think if we consider now higher education also has a lot of that neoliberal capitalistic influence, would you say that actually makes the wealth disparity or the poverty gap even worse in some settings? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, thank you very much for a good point. Yes, I totally agree with you. Actually, of course, we have a lot of tasks and a lot of subjects in our university, but especially for the case of my university, we are now focusing more on the liberal arts or more qualified liberal arts. Liberal arts can be interpreted in various ways, but when we reshape our liberal arts science, focusing on those kind of creativity, critical thinking, technical skills, and social behavior skills should be very, very important. At the same time, of course, not only higher education sector, we try to consider the connection from secondary education to the higher education. Now, this point also must be discussing a lot in Japan. So, as you already said, yeah, if we can include this kind of point, not only just case studies, can expand, try to connect with another higher education sector or secondary sectors together, might be very good progress for us to think about the education for sustainable development. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. Good ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Miki. So is there any questions?
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Actually, I have two questions for you, Prof. Miki. Your presentation has been very interesting, and I'm attracted to your creativity and critical thinking rubric. Okay, where you explain imagining, doing, reflecting, inquiring, and how could you take this critical thinking rubric and approach what we are facing now, the COVID-19 emergency, plus you mentioned poverty, that students have a problem when they are in a situation where they face poverty. Okay, these two problems, how can you tackle them using the rubric that you showed us just now? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for good questions. Actually, this rubric is used for the kind of assessment for the learning outcome. So not only just to try to look at this rubric from this point of view, first of all, now OECD and our team has creating a questionnaire first. And before starting our class, we conducted the pre-survey. And after finishing the course, we also the post-survey, and we can evaluate how the student can get a kind of the competence, a kind of cultural competence, like critical thinking or creativity. To tell the truth, last year, we have already tested, and maybe critical thinking should be more easier for us to clarify what kind of change of the student learning outcome. But creativity is a very, very difficult for us to assess the student kind of skills development. So that's the first point. But for example, our colleague, the environmental studies class, adopted this rubric cube, and environmental studies require to be more multidisciplinary or trying to think about the multi-dimension. So that's why the critical thinking or creativity are more easier for us to clarify those points. On the other hand, your second question is poverty issues. Yes, this is a very, very another important issues, because usually the ESD has been focusing on the environment or biodiversity. Those points are very common topic among the nation states in the world. So that's why now still UNESCO or international organization focus on it. But poverty or equality, equity, peace building, or migration or coexistence, those points should be included in the ESD. So that's why in my class, not the environment issues, I'm more focused on the how we can create a more multi-diversified society. Yeah, actually, I visited Malaysia many times, and I have always learned a lot of things from your society. So that's why sometimes comparative between the Malaysian and Japanese society, we can think about what kind of social cultural conflict we must tackle in those things. And in that process, we need to try to introduce this kind of the critical thinking or creativity factors. But still, sorry, this is, I also just struggling how we can create a more attractive curriculum in my class. So thank you very much. If I can share your experiences more.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
To do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Miki, and thanks to Prof. Halima for asking the questions. So now we would like to invite the second presenter. Prof. Miki, hope you don't mind to stop sharing.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you very much
yes,
for everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we would like to welcome the second presenter, Dr. Jasvir from Australia. So maybe Dr. Jasvir can stand by your So Dr. Jasvir will present a topic entitled South Asian International Graduates Employability Journey in Australia, Success or Failure in COVID-19 Era. So yes, Dr. Jasvir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Thien. Can you please remind me if I got 5 more minutes? And then
yes, sure.
Okay.
Yes, I will type in the chat, the chat room. Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. As good afternoon from Melbourne. It's 12 o'clock right here, and good morning in Malaysia. So today's topic would be South Asian International Graduates Employability Journey in Australia. This research was conducted during COVID-19, which happened last year. So I'm Dr. Jasvir from La Trobe University. Firstly, I would like to thank La Trobe University and Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK, because there was this research collaboration grant provided to me and my colleagues to run this project. What is the agenda today? So I'll talk about the introduction of the research background and the literature. We just touch a little bit on this introduction, and then we'll talk about research methodologies. And what I want to focus is the findings. I would like to provide this caution statement where this is just preliminary findings as today, because I still need to really dive into the findings of this project, and then we'll conclude the presentation. Now, in pre-COVID era, international education in Australia was the third biggest export, which is worth 40 over billion. Now, in 2019, there were over 300 international students studied in Australian universities. Right now, I think I just checked the number. I think it's half of this number currently. Top sending countries include China, India, Brazil, Malaysia, and South Korea. We all know that one of the main outcomes of gaining international education for international students is to secure employment upon graduation. Previously, we always think about, they might want to secure employment in their home country or in the host country. But right now, a recent study of mine and Professor Hazri Jamil talked about, they also want to venture into third country. One of my studies looked at Chinese graduates from Australia, argued that they are returning to their home country, which is China, to seek employment opportunities. Previously, they all wanted to stay in Australia. So this is a very interesting finding where I went to China and interviewed Chinese graduates from La Trobe University and asked them, why are you returning home? And some of the reasons they provided were stricter Australian migration policy, discrimination towards Chinese graduates by Australian employers, and difficulties in obtaining suitable employment in Australia. What they meant by this was, it's so hard to get a job in their field of studies, and they are discriminated because of their language proficiency. And also they are not on the PR or permanent residencies visa, or they are citizens of Australia. So these are some dynamic challenges that they were facing. That's how these reasons push them out from Australia to gain employment in Australia, but going back home to gain employment opportunities. And they are doing very well in China, but that is another story that I will talk some other time. However, South Asian graduates, their intentions are to obtain employment and permanent residency in Australia upon graduation. They are still pushing it through. Now, who are these South Asian graduates? They are graduates from India, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from Maldives, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan. So these are the countries that these students come from. They still want to stay in Australia and gain employment opportunities here. But there is very little research relating to their employability in Australia. That's how this study has filled in the gap. Now, most of the research on South Asian international students or graduates are skewed towards exploring their motivations to study abroad, such as in Australia, and their migration experiences, but very little understanding their employability journey in Australia, and now added is an extra complexity, which is COVID-19. Specifically, as I have mentioned, that Indian graduates especially, and also other South Asian graduates, are mainly looking for job opportunities in Australia. But the Department of Education and Training did a survey, found that their employment rates are slightly lower as opposed to other nationalities such as Chinese students, because Chinese students have gone back home. But those who are staying here in Australia, their employment rates are very low in terms of these Indian graduates and other South Asian graduates. As I have mentioned, inadequate research is conducted on understanding their employability experiences, particularly during COVID-19 crisis. Therefore, this presentation then aims to focus on what are their general employability experiences during COVID-19, what challenges they faced, and also what kind of strategies they took in securing future employment, in securing their career plans in Australia. And also they provided some thoughts on policies and strategies Australian government or the industry group or even the universities should think about in building their employability in Australia. The interviews were conducted by me, although it was a team effort, but I conducted the semi-structured interviews with 20 graduates of La Trobe University who were currently working in Australia from December 2019 to June 2020. How did I find these graduates is via our alumni office, via LinkedIn, and then it just snowballed. Like, you know, someone knows someone that has graduated, and then I started interviewing them. I would say 20, some of you would say that, oh, it's just 20 graduates. It was so hard to find graduates to be interviewed. Not because that I couldn't find them, but most of them they have gone back home because of COVID-19, and they had their own challenges during COVID-19, and we're still in COVID-19 era. So, and it's not that simply I stopped at 20 graduates, but I could see that the saturation data was set in already. They were talking about the same experiences of the employability. I interviewed 11 males and 9 females, mainly from India and also from Bangladesh. I couldn't get from any other countries. 16 got jobs. All of them were working, as I have mentioned, but 16 had jobs that were related to their studies. 4 had unrelated jobs to their studies. I'll talk about this more in my findings. 16 were on TR, meaning temporary resident visa, and 4 were on either they were citizen of Australia or they gained the permanent residence visa. Graduates were from the sciences and also from the arts. As you can see on the slides, many of them came from accounting, engineering, MBA, public health, so on and so forth. Now, what were the employability experiences in general? There was a spectrum, very gloomy. Gloomy meaning unsuccessful obtaining jobs related to their studies. They have done management accounting courses, but they're working as a security guard, or at Big W is a store here, or as a store assistant, which is not related to their studies. To very great, successful in gaining jobs, especially those who have done or studied IT or planning in gaining a job in their respective fields, and also in health services. Because of COVID-19, one graduate actually gained employment at Telstra. Telstra is the telecom company here. So he has done something to do with IT, and they wanted someone who has got experience in IT and also studied IT. So this telecom company has then picked this graduate up and gave him employment opportunity. How difficult was it to keep or find jobs? For the gloomy ones, it was very difficult. For the successful one, it was quite all right in locating that related job experience while studying as well as once they have graduated. And why is that? Look, they all were talking about when they came as an international student, they were new to the country. They had to adjust first to their studies and then find jobs to support their living costs. And usually they find jobs which are not related to their studies. So they find odd jobs, working in restaurants, working as a cleaner. But, you know, they had to do that because of their financial constraints. And then they were very happy with the money that they have received. There were a lot they were earning. And therefore, they had limited time to find jobs which were related to their studies. They only realized this once they have nearly graduation because they were thinking like, okay, now when I'm going for interviews, the employers are asking me whether do I have any related job, any related experiences or not. And that was a ha-ha moment for them, that if they want to build a career in Australia, they should have worked in that industry that is related to their, to their studies. TR visa, their temporary visa came into play where employers wanted to employ graduates that are more stable, that they have they are citizen of Australia, or they have got permanent residency. So that is also another dynamic that provided that challenges to them. How is this crisis impacting on their career plans for the future? All of them were saying plans are definitely interrupted because of COVID-19, harder to network with others, especially to meet face-to-face for coffee. Like here in Melbourne, you're so hyped up on coffee. We meet or they wanted to meet with their future employers and mentors. They want to meet face-to-face rather than via Zoom. And we know that, personal touch is different than just looking at a screen. Harder to get internships, harder to get face-to-face internship, what alone virtual internship, so that they can then build a profile. There was this, I can remember this person saying that today is the interview with you, but I'm also thinking about my contract, whether it will be renewed or not. But he was very confident that his contract will be renewed because of the financial cuts. So he was in a limbo whether his contract will be extended, or he was in the financial sector. And harder to get scholarship because some of them did their masters and they wanted to pursue PhD in the regional areas. Like in Australia, they are promoting their regional areas, like in Kampung. Yeah. So they want to, they're really interested in getting PhD students in the regions, but because of the financial cuts, because higher education in Australia is not the place to be right now. We have got a lot of cuts, staff cuts, everything, financial cut, whatever you name it. So one of the graduates want to go for further studies, and the TR, temporary visa, is also expiring soon. So she was in a limbo in that perspective. How are international graduates navigating the job market in these unprecedented times? Well, they are very vigilant, I would say. They're very resilient. They have got this perseverance in them. They are still applying for related jobs. Those who have not got their related jobs to study, they are still applying for them. Those who were in their related job, they're still updating their CV. They're still updating their LinkedIn profile. They're learning from YouTube on how to do that, on how to present their best self. They are also upskilling. The person who have got that job at the telecom company, he was still upskilling himself via LinkedIn learning. So he was learning on his own relating to his studies, IT. They also do a professional to get that degree assessed and to obtain related internship. Professional year meaning they have graduated from their studies, but in order to gain further visa to stay here in Australia, they have to get their degree assessed and they have to do this professional year for 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. And in that professional year, they upskill themselves and also they obtain related internship experiences. They also provided some thoughts, some strategies or policies that Australian government, industry group or employers and the university sector should think about in order to build employability for international graduates. So their thoughts for Australian government is please provide assurance and educate employers that graduates on TR, temporary residence, they have got the full working rights. Employers in Australia they don't know that these graduates have got full working rights. They can work in Australia, although they are on temporary residence. It's like, a stepping stone to be on TR to get PR. And they need to get related job experiences for them to collect as much of points they can for their PR and provide more jobs for TR holders. So they are pushing the government to push the employers to understand this mechanism. They are also saying to the industry or the employers to provide a chance for graduates, as they have also got talent and also skills and knowledge to prove themselves, not only looking at their visa, but also looking at their skills and experiences. And for higher education institutions, they are looking at academic staff members to build connections between themselves as students and graduates, and also with the industry. At least guide them on how to find jobs in Australia, what kind of jobs are out there against their studies. They want that personal touches from academic staff members, as opposed, like, you know, in La Trobe, we have got this career success or career office here. But I think they are much more closer to their academic staff members, and they feel much more comfortable and they have that confidence in academic staff members that, you know, they will provide them the right kind of advice. At La Trobe University, we have got this mentoring program for students. Any students, domestic or international students, can join this mentoring program. And most of them, in my interview, my interviewees were saying, those who have joined this mentoring program, they were highly appreciate of this mentoring program because they were paired with someone who is from the industry or prospective employer. They mentored these graduates, and they really had a ball. And because some of them got a job because their mentor was from the industry. So in conclusion, this presentation has provided some kind of, you know, an opening eye of how these South Asian international graduates are understanding their employability experiences, the challenges that they have, faced. And also they provided some strategies in how to increase their employability during COVID-19. They also provided some implications to Australian higher education institutions to how to build their employability via curriculum, co-curriculum, or extracurriculum activities to develop their employability. And with that, thank you. I'm within the time.
Yes, very good. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Jasvir. So now I would like to open for Q&A. If there's any questions to ask.
I can see some chats, but I cannot concentrate on the chat. So it was blinking on my.
Any questions for Dr. Jasvir?
And just in terms of thanks for the talk, Dr. Jasvir. In terms of your interviews with the students, did you get an impression that they had expected to get very good jobs upon graduating? Is there like a big discrepancy between what they expected and then, of course, what actually happened after they graduated?
They were expecting jobs related to whatever they have studied because they are on temporary resident visa. They want to get PR, so they need to collect points. So it was a shocker to them as well that it was harder for them to gain jobs in that related. But then they understood because they were doing odd jobs, they were just concentrating on getting odd jobs and also on their studies. They forgot this part. And some of the students were very proactive in terms of, gaining whatever the university was giving to them, especially the mentoring program or from the student, the career office. Some of them said that we missed our chance because they didn't look into the email. They didn't think about how to plan their career. So there were two perspectives there. Hope I answered your question.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, if there's another question for now, do you think that's more related to the students you interviewed, or is it like a reflection of how the industries that they're related to, as well as the fields that they're in, has changed, or is it the COVID factor, in your opinion?
I think COVID has definitely put another complexity to their challenges. As we all know, Australian employers, they really want someone who can speak fluent English. But for these South Asian graduates, they think that their English is good. It's not, they cannot imitate what the Australians are talking, their accent, but it's good. That's how I can, portray myself. I can develop myself. But they were a bit taken aback about, especially when employers were turning them down because of their visa, because TR is top down from the government. So they were thinking that the government would have liaised with these employers, and they would have gotten a job, not because of their visa, but because of their knowledge and their skills that they have. But that was really taken aback.
Thanks, Dr. Kai, for the questions. So is there any question?
I have a question.
Yeah,
Yes,
please,
Dr.
Doctor. Yeah, Prof. Halimah, silakan.
Dr. Jasvir, you did research on South Asian students' employability in Australia. What about research on the other students? You mentioned China, okay, but there are students from Japan and from Southeast Asia and all that. Why did you choose to leave them out from your research?
Very good question. Because this is institutional research, at La Trobe we have got a lot of Indian students, a lot of Pakistani, a lot of Bangladeshi students. So we wanted to look into this cohort. China, I have also looked into Chinese students, and now my next research will be on the Southeast Asian students. So I'm going step by step.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. So we have another 7 minutes. So is there any questions to ask Dr. Jasvir? Any more questions? Okay, Dr. Jasvir, I'm not asking a questions. You have provided us a very good presentation. So I just would like to ask, yeah, in your last slide, you did mention about the implications of the study, particularly for the Australian government, how to revise their policy and so on. But I'm thinking perhaps this implication is also meaningful for the graduates' home countries as well, because you can see that it's keeping losing their talents to Australia at this perspective.
No, it's true. Like, Chinese students are definitely going back home. I'm in Australia since 2000. I've been teaching since 2012. So I always ask my students, like, do you want to go back? And majority were international students. And I ask them this question every time, do you want to go home or do you want to stay put? In 2012 to 2016, all of them will say, I want to stay here. That's land of opportunity. After 2016, I've seen the change. I'm like, why would you want to go back home? So I just casually ask them, and they give me this, whatever research that the findings that I've got from these Chinese students, they want to go back home because China economy was booming at that point of time. China was affecting them, giving them money to go back, like what we had in Malaysia, talent home. So, and FDI companies are in China right now, and they want someone who can speak and read and write English. So that's how they say that rather with all the complexity here, discrimination, whatever, no, I better go back home. And remember, they have got this only one child policy, and that also their parents are also pressuring them to go back home. And they are telling to the students like, look, China is different now, blah, 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 and all that. So that's how but for South Asian students, they still want to stick here. So and then I have, for Southeast Asian students, and I not interviewed, like informally just talk to Malaysian students, they want to go back home as well. They don't want to stay here. Similar complexity. So that will be my next, like what Prof. Halimah was saying, that will be my next step to interview these people and see what else I can find.
Thanks, Dr. Jasvir, for the sharing. So now, since no questions, I would like to welcome the third presenter. Dr. Jasvir already stopped sharing, right? So I would like to welcome Dr. Kai to upload to prepare. Yeah, good. So let's welcome our third presenter, Dr. Khayriyyah Muhammad Hanafiah. Yeah, Khayriyyah. I used to call Dr. Kai. Okay, so her presentation is chronic and acute disruptions in higher education. Yes, Dr. Kai. please.
Thanks very much, Dr. Again. So a little bit of a disclaimer, my main bread and butter is not doing educational research. So I do apologize if any shortcomings. So my first experience actually presenting in a conference on education, and I think it's been a really great learning experience. And this particular topic is part of a larger study looking at university curriculum in Malaysia in general, but we're focusing this presentation on chronic and acute disruptions that we've observed. So this is a study, or this presentation is authored by both me and Dr. Changda. Oops, okay, there we go. So just to start off, I think, oh no, sorry, I accidentally, okay. Just to start off, I think it's important to recognize that higher education in Malaysia and likely in many places all over the world have faced some significant challenges in recent times. One of it is funding. Then there's the question between supply versus demand, either imagined or anticipated versus what's actually happening. And then we have something that will go in a bit more detail, but this idea of measuring short-term outputs versus the long-term intangible aims of higher education or universities. Then the aspect of globalization, which I think Dr. Jasvir touched upon as well in her presentation. And then the idea of disruptions in general. That's what I'll be focusing on for this talk today. So when I say disruptions, we're talking about two main ones. And the first one is a chronic disruption, which is a bit more subtle, a bit less obvious, and it tends to be something that changes or forces the university or the higher education ecosystem to evolve. And this also shifts certain priorities and purposes. And in the context of this talk, we're talking specifically about some neoliberalism influences that we've seen happen over the past few decades. In terms of the acute disruptions, so these refer to the more sudden random things that happen that require the universities or the ecosystem to rapidly adapt just to survive that disruption. And I think the best example here is COVID-19 and the fact that most, if not all, universities have had to shift to emergency online learning. So this is sort of like the findings nested within a larger study, but the large study is a qualitative study where we sample 5 IPTAs and 3 IPTS, or 5 public universities and 3 private universities, as well as some representatives of regulatory bodies or people in the academic community, amounting to 41 individuals. And we also sampled from these 5 public universities and 3 private universities, senior year students, amounting to 45 students. With the academics, we did individual sessions where we interviewed them in a structured or semi-structured way for an hour. And for these students, we did a focus group discussion about 1.5 hours in duration. And we also had them write down any responses that they had that they didn't have time to share during the discussion itself, and they sent that to us later on. And then all of these interviews were recorded and de-identified, transcribed, and we did a thematic analysis to summarize what answers we could find to the questions that we asked. So some of the chronic disruptions that we identified in the interviews is one, this idea of a shift from traditional disciplinary boundaries to incorporation of new components to the curriculum. 3, a change in the academic culture and environment. And then the erosion of authority of the academic fraternity. In terms of the acute disruptions, there's one, the biggest one is the changes in campus life, challenges in achieving learning outcomes, and then the altered teaching and learning dynamics. And so I'll go into these in detail. So the first disruption, this idea of shifting from the traditional boundaries of a discipline, that's been recognized mostly to be driven by changes in the market and job opportunities. So for example, economics, which used to be a very strong traditional program, it now has difficulty in being offered as a standalone program. And if you look at even hybrid programs like biotechnology, which is a combination of biology, which used to be a very traditional standalone program, and technology, which is a bit more amorphous. Even biotechnology as a hybrid program seems to do better when it's also specialized or merged with some other aspects like food technology to remain competitive. And this is all related to the opportunities for employment. And in the case of the biotechnology, food technology combination, food biotechnology, what the respondents seem to indicate is most of the students are still getting jobs in the food industry, or rather the halal industry in Malaysia. The ones who had any biotech work were quite limited, and actually a majority of them would go into sales if they were purely from a biotechnology program. So just an example of a quote, this kind of shows just how we're having a bit of a mismatch between the programs that we're able to offer as well as the jobs that we think are out there. I'll just read out what was highlighted from this particular academic's response, in which they say biotechnology in our country or Malaysia is not mature yet, and the progress is not as what we want. And that's why we're having this mismatch in employment with the graduates that we're producing. And as a result, we feel pressured to further specialize and merge different programs to try and meet these changing industry opportunities. The second chronic disruption is this incorporation of new components beyond the discipline. And this one we could argue is driven by agenda at the national level. So the easiest example for Malaysia is this general education subjects, or the MPU, and this is mandated by the Department of Higher Education, and it's also enforced through the accreditation process. And what we're getting from the respondents is that they don't see the relevance to the program or the curriculum, and this is from both academics and students. But I think international students were in particular very, I would say they don't have very positive things to say about these type of subjects, because in the end, it also becomes a complication for the program to manage. These programs, these MPU subjects tend to be offered for the entire university, very large groups. So it becomes a scheduling nightmare in a sense. And when the program wants to revise the curriculum, they do have to take these external subjects into consideration. So this is one comment or quote from a student. MPU subjects are useless. I do not need a lecturer to teach me common sense. Some of these subjects are good, but it is irrelevant to what we learn and practice. So I think as they are being delivered right now, the MPU subjects are still seen as this very external, irrelevant items within their curriculum. The third chronic disruption is the change in academic culture and environment. And I don't know, it probably varies to different people. Some people feel this disruption is more obvious than others, but it's hard to deny that it is driven by the competitive nature of higher education, especially with universities trying to become ranked higher in relation to other universities, which is a fairly recent phenomenon. So this has led to a lot of universities shifting to emphasize more on research and publication, because these give outputs that can be measured on an annual basis or are key performance indicators. And so this relegates tasks such as teaching undergraduate courses, particularly large introductory courses. They're not so attractive anymore because they're very time consuming. They detract from research, and they don't give you any KPIs for that. So that's an environmental change and a culture change as well. And this is unfortunately also having some impact on the curriculum, because it or in a sense, it encourages us to lose some of the fundamentals in the curriculum when people don't find the teaching of these fundamental subjects to be important. So an example of one academic's response, So this academic was saying how in the past, all the 101 courses or all the fundamental courses are taught by professors, but now they're taught by junior lecturers who'll be forced to take on the workload, making all the tutorials, examining the scripts. And this is a disservice to the teaching of that course because it can't be taught by junior lecturers. So this is obviously, I mean, not to say that junior lecturers can't teach courses well, but I think that the point being made here is that it's become not an attractive thing and it becomes an assignment to people who can't reject the assignment. And that's that change in a sense, our core business as lecturers and our core business in higher education. And the fourth chronic disruption that we identified is this idea that the academic fraternity is no longer the key custodians of the curriculum and academic program. So in the past, we could say that the curriculum is in a sense protected by this feedback loop where you have the program committee or the lecturers teaching it, designing, revising the curriculum, that goes through the academic board and that goes up to the Senate, and then that then goes back down and we have that cycle. But now it seems that we do have very direct influences from industry and market stakeholders, and as well external agencies. So that includes accreditation agencies or even ministry, because in Malaysia, and it's quite unique to other countries, the higher education is essentially directly under a ministry. So they tend to supersede the power of the Senate or all the other academic groups within a university. So I think another interesting quote related to this is from this academic where they say, you know, when we want to revamp the curriculum, what do people say? Find out what the market wants. And that's something that's taken very seriously in a sense that it can make or break a particular revision or a change that you want to introduce in the curriculum. If the industry doesn't think it's relevant, then it doesn't go in. If the industry thinks it's relevant, even if there's not actually capacity to deliver it, there is this drive to try and introduce it anyway. And this academic challenges that idea because they think it's not the right way to go, because it's not about producing people so that they can get a high-paying job in the private sector. Of course, that's also a question. So now we go into some of the acute disruptions. I'm just going to check for time. Okay, nothing yet. So this idea that we had to change the university life because we had to close the campus. The first main challenge is the logistical challenge. And that was a huge disruption, just getting everybody out of their dorms, back into their homes, ensuring that to happen in a safe way while the pandemic was starting to peak. That was a huge challenge. And of course, there was a lot of inconsistencies in the communication with regards to, you know, do students stay, do students go back, when do they come back, who can come back? There was a lot of, I think, confusion around that, which were very disruptive for planning, even from a week-to-week basis during the height of the pandemic. And I think a more crucial impact that was less appreciated and now becoming more obvious is this idea that students are now segregated from peer-to-peer support, and that university learning environment, the campus life is basically the university learning environment, and that's something that we can't provide anymore because of the campus closures. So I just looked up some old pictures when I was putting together this talk, and made me a bit sad. This is how things look like when I was last, I'm in Melbourne now, but when I was at USM, this is a corridor where we had our classes. This is a lecture hall, a typical lecture hall. But back then, you'd have students obviously filling it up at any time in the day. And you had life happening in the corridors. A lot of the learning is not just within that 1 hour of a lecture session. They come out of the lecture halls. There's activities going on. There's societies trying to get people to join. There's ad hoc things. And those are the things that are painfully missing now in a university life. So the second acute disruption is challenges in achieving learning outcomes. And I speak this specifically from coming from a biotech microbiology program. So the psychomotor skills that we need to achieve are near impossible to achieve under this current disruption. So this is how a lab session would look like. You've got people using their hands, they're wearing lab coats, that they have to put on gloves. All of that is part of that learning experience. And for some students in the final year, they have to do a final year project. A lot of it involves going out in the field, collecting samples, working together in teams. All those things can't happen anymore, or at least it's not happening to the extent it was before. A lot of people change their topics just because, you know, depending on the day, they might not be able to go out again if there was heightened restrictions. So this is some quotes to show, like, this is a very common, I think, complaint about what's happening now. Like, no matter how many YouTube videos you watch, you can't achieve the same level of outcome at the end of a practical session. Our technology isn't good enough to replicate that. And for students, I think they're the ones who had to sacrifice a traditional final year project experience. They really feel the loss in that, you know, moving forward and graduating without having that experience. So the third disruption is the acute, the altered teaching and learning dynamics. But it's not all negative. There were some positive responses as well. A number of lecturers, academics noted that, you know, students were actually more eager to ask questions through the chat function when they had an online class, whereas in a traditional lecture, you might have one or two hands up or none. And then there were some creative assignments that weren't just, you know, the quizzes and pen and paper stuff. Like, people were forced to get out of their comfort zone and think outside the box to utilize a lot of the online resources as well, because that's all we had right now. And some of these are things that they said they would want to keep even after the pandemic was over and once we can resume campus life. The disadvantages clearly is because of limitations and disparity in internet access and costs. So this actually is a really huge limitation because it affects as well what a lecturer thinks they can deliver to students. So they try to go for the lowest data consuming resource. But additionally from that, when, let's say, they're doing a synchronous or a live online lecture, most people will turn off their cameras to conserve data. So the lecturers can't gauge the student body language. They can't gauge the level of understanding. And that was a big challenge. And then I think last but not least, a lot of programs had to replace or reduce their final exams. And this was replaced with a lot of assignments or tests. And this amounted in a huge amount of work, both for the lecturers and the students. And there was still a question of, are the assessments reaching the quality that they need, and are they done with integrity? These are still questions that I think a lot of the academics didn't have an answer to. So some of the quotes here, the internet connectivity, you know, it's very expensive to just stream a lecture. And so that's one thing that becomes a huge disparity. And so some academics who feel that they can't gauge the understanding, they'll give a quiz, but that also becomes additional work for everybody. And in terms of the students, one thing, the positive thing that they noted is that because there was no final exam, instead there were like open book examinations or case studies, it was more creative, and they also felt challenged in a better way. Some academics, as I mentioned, felt closer to their students now because the students are contacting them on WhatsApp and asking them questions at various times. Although again, these have implications on everybody's workload and work-life balance. And this is, I think, a common theme that we saw, is that because of the coordination issues and the fact that everybody's courses now don't have final exams or have a very small percentage for final exams, these little assignments that everybody's giving them is adding up, and some of them just become really overwhelming, especially when it's due around the same time. So just quick summary, hopefully I haven't exceeded my time. the chronic disruptions that we observed were very gradual, and it seems to be more subtle and I guess subject to opinion, but they do change the purpose and ways in which higher education operate. Acute disruptions were very abrupt and forceful, and there's, I think, a lot of impact that we're now seeing that we still have so much to do to understand what is actually going to be the long-term problem from this acute disruption. So some further questions to ponder to different parties, to the universities, like how resilient are our programs so that they're adaptive to both these acute and chronic disruptions, to the academics, how have these disruptions changed our approaches, and can we withstand or adapt to these changes? For the students, I think it was very nice to actually talk to a lot of the students, because these are things that we suspected were happening, but to actually hear them voice it out, I think that's something that does change a lot of our perspective on how to go about things. And finally, the other stakeholders, I think this is where it's really important to understand where there are other stakeholders who aren't directly affected by the disruptions, but then become a source of disruption. To what extent should they have that impact on the higher education system? So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening. And the study was supported by an FRGS fund. So thank you to the study participants. And these are some of the team members here who are not able to be present. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Khai. So now we'd like to welcome questions from the floor, please. I would like to welcome questions from the floor.
Okay, I have a question first. Okay. I'm interested in your discussion of the curriculum, where how it is created, how it was created. You know, when only the university was involved, the academic board, the Senate, and the program was created. And then you see, there are disruptions which are industry or the market and external agencies, okay, that control the curriculum now, that it has become more difficult to create a program without these disruptions. So how do you handle, do you think we can handle, we at university level, when we create our programs? Because we have, at my faculty, in my school, we have created a new program. We have reshuffled our program, okay? So with industry and external agencies in mind, we recreated the programs, reshuffled them. So how do we negotiate with industry and with external agencies when we create our programs?
That's a really, I mean, that's a good question. And I think that's kind of like a key question that, I mean, I wish there was a way for us to sit down and as like the academic fraternity and say, you know, look, this is where we think, this is how we move forward. This is how much influence we'll allow you to have on our programs. And this is how much that we're going to stick to our guns to regardless. But I think this ties back to a more complicated issue, actually, because when we talk about external agencies, for example, the ministry, for a public university, our chain of command still ends actually with people outside of the university. And I think it also ties back to this idea of university autonomy as well. If in Malaysia, our universities are not autonomous, it's going to be very difficult for our academic programs to be autonomous. It's always going to be susceptible to external influences, some that are direct, like coming from an accreditation agency and whatnot. But if they also think that, no, you need to listen to the industry because your job is to produce graduates who can be employable, then we end up having to listen to that as well. And I think that's kind of how it sort of happened over the years. But in relation to your question, I mean, it's something that I'm part of a committee to come up with a program at my school as well. And it comes to an even very simple thing, the title of the program. Apparently there's a rule that says you can't have the word "and" in the title. And so we've been racking our brains how to get the title without the word "and." And nobody really knows why. It's just a rule that has been imposed on us. And it's I think a real challenge. And I think it's actually worthy of a deeper discussion about actually, is this the right way to go for us to keep allowing our academic programs to be dictated by people or parties outside of the academic fraternity? So, I mean, Prof, I really don't know. I don't have the answer, but it's a question that I've been asking myself as well. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the answers from Dr. Khai. So I would like to welcome next questions, if any.
Hey, hi, I'm Lee here. Can you hear my voice? I would have
Yep.
one quick questions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so in your opening slide, you identified the new liberalism as one of the driving forces that cause, quote unquote, the disruptions. You highlight some of the questions. Those questions take the perspective of new liberalisms, right? So my question, I just want to understand from as academicians, where is your stance in relations to the new liberalisms? Because I think in OC, like UK, for example, there is academician has a strong pushback on the new liberalisms in the educations, right? So I would like to hear your opinions of where you think you want to position yourself in this pure educations versus market-driven, which is underpinned by the new liberalisms. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, and it's going to be a really tough one for me to answer. So Dr. Wan Changda unfortunately can't be with us today, and I was afraid I was going to get a question like this because this would be something I would pass to him because it's not really within my realm of expertise to really fully answer. But I think as it stands, I'm quite aligned with him on this idea that the universities does appear to have lost itself along the way when we allow ourselves to be dictated by the market, because it's hard. I mean, again, I think I asked this question to Prof. I think Sugimura earlier about this idea of, what is the purpose of education? And when we think about education traditionally, it's always been the great equalizer. It's supposed to be that thing that closes the gap between the rich and the poor, affords everybody opportunities to improve themselves. But once we start adopting this model where the university is just to produce workers for specific markets that are always changing, where is that disparity going to be improved? We're, in a sense, turning people back into cogs in a machine. And so I think this is where I really think we need to take a good hard look at to what extent has neoliberalism actually permeated our entire higher education ecosystem. It's something that I think is a very important and very disturbing thing to consider. I don't know if that answers your question. I think it would be good. I'll let Dr. Chang know about your question because he'll have probably better comments than mine. But thank you for that.
Thanks, Dr. Khai. So any more questions? We have another 5 minutes. Okay, if no, then I would like to welcome our fourth presenter. Okay, so our last presenter, Professor Reiko. Yamada, are you ready? Yes, Professor Reiko Yamada. Yeah. So yes, Professor Reiko is going to present a title, How Does Higher Education in Japan, USA, Korea, and Taiwan Cultivate global competencies.
Yes, can you?
Comparative analysis, yes, of a student survey in the era of COVID-19.
Okay.
Yes,
Can
Reiko.
you see my
Yeah, I can see your
slide?
slide.
Okay.
Yes, I can see your
And
slide.
my Wi-Fi is not stable, so I cannot put on my video. Is it okay?
Okay, okay.
Sorry. And
We can see your photo. It's okay. It's fine. So please
it is
proceed.
okay. Thank you very much. And it is my great pleasure to attend this Global Higher Education Forum 2021. And my title is How Does Higher Education in Japan, United States, Korea, and Taiwan Cultivate Global Competences? Global comparative analysis of student survey in the era of COVID-19. And former presentations of other participants were very helpful for me to understand what is going on in the other countries. And today's outline is as follows. Background, purpose, research outline, and definition of GC, global competences. Second, explanation of our survey project and result and analysis of 3 countries, Taiwan, Korea, and the United States. And fourth, and I like to only focus on the result and analysis of Japanese case. And background of the studies is as following. COVID-19 has spread throughout the world. As of July 2021, vaccination levels vary from country to country, and the return to a situation centered on face-to-face university education is still uncertain. This unprecedented coronavirus pandemic has had a large impact on institutions of higher education. Changes pre- and post-pandemic to values and norms constructed in response to the changing times while drawing on the past and the various systems people have built in recent years. And there may even the global scale paradigm shifts. And the purpose of my research is this study considers the ideal state and direction of university education with corona and post-corona pandemic. That means a new normal in these situations. It will examine the new normal and the possibilities and challenges it brings in relation to the direction and development of global competences. And from now on, I like to call the global competence as GC. And this is through university education based on comparative studies. And in terms of the problem settings, this study will go on to an empirical investigation conducted by an online questionnaire that surveys the following: whether university education tailored to the acquisition of GC and organized on the premise of free movement across borders, namely study abroad programs and overseas internships conducted face-to-face, are able to perform the same function in the corona era as before. And secondly, whether GC and 21st century values sought across so many countries are transforming or not. So we set up the research framework in this by using the 4 countries. The Taiwan has been successful to control corona pandemic in 2020. And the United States is not necessarily successful to control corona pandemic in 2020. And Japan and Korea, they are somewhere in between Taiwan and the United States in 2020. So we choose these 4 countries and make the surveys for those students in those countries. First, I would like to present a comparison between 3 countries of United States, Korea, and Taiwan. And second, I will focus on only Japanese cases analysis. And we define GC as skills that work together with diverse people and to find and solve problems in these studies. But global competences involves that kind of skills, critical thinking or logical thinking and so on. Anyway. And the survey, I wanted to explain the survey outline. The survey targeted bachelor's degree students in their second year or higher and graduate students in Japan, the United States, Korea, and Taiwan. And first year students who matriculated during the COVID-19 crisis were excluded because they only experienced online, mostly the online classes. The questionnaire survey was conducted through an internet research company on a nationwide scale in each of those 4 countries from September until the end of November 2020. And respondents, we got 3,296 in total. In Japan, more than 1,000, United States and Korea, same number, 824, Taiwan, 618. And undergraduate, 2,683, and graduate, 613. And the sample respondents from the United States, we got a large number of graduates compared with the other 3 countries. Details are shown like this here. Please look at. And this slide shows the descriptive statistics of 4 countries. And in case of Japanese case, please focus on this part about countries that have been educated after high school. In Japan, most of the students experience the same experience at the high school, undergraduate, and graduate school. So they do not go to the get education from the outside countries. This is very specific case. And this is the experience at the university before and after COVID-19 pandemic. So you can compare with the before Corona and after Corona in 3 countries. And I can say that all items declined across the board in all 3 countries. For example, Taiwan took humanities and art courses 76.5 to 15.7, and others too. So the experience that has been regarded as important as student engagement has stagnated in all 3 countries. And this is the acquisition of GC before and after COVID-19 pandemic. And in the United States and Korea, the acquisition status of GC after the Corona pandemic is generally lower than before COVID-19 pandemic. In both countries, there are declines, namely 22 out of 24 items in the United States and 23 items in Korea is decreased. And in Taiwan, items related to actual cross-cultural practice or behaviors are declined. However, items related to knowledge acquisition and attitude increased. Statistical significant difference of t-test of Taiwan items is none. And in Korea, STEM, knowledge of information field and utilization of multiple languages, no significant difference. All remaining items have significant differences. In the United States, there are declines in items such as humanities, social sciences, STEM, knowledge in the information field, multilingual utilization and presentations in multiple languages, openness to new fields and challenge for innovations. But there are no statistically significant differences, just the kind of decline in all items, 22 items in the United States case. And this slide shows the result of analysis of variance of factors of GC after COVID-19 pandemic. We have 3 factors through factor analysis. One factor is cross-cultural collaboration we name. And scores of United States and Taiwan tend to be high, and the scores of Korea tend to be low. And second factor is the scores of professional practical ability. And scores of professional practical ability of Korea tend to be higher than that of other 2 countries. So we can say that Korea mainly prioritize the professional practical ability than other countries. Regarding of scores, cross-cultural collaborations based on gender, scores of women tend to be higher than those of men in all 3 countries. And third factor is we call the basic liberal arts skills. And scores of men tend to be higher than those of women in United States and Taiwan. And scores of professional practical ability, scores of men tend to be higher than those of women in 3 countries. Then how about the class type during COVID-19 pandemic era? In Taiwan, proportion of completely face-to-face class is between 26 to 5% in small, middle, and large scale and classes involving experiments and practical training and classes involving seminar. Proportion of online class is around 35% in only large scale class. So Taiwan keeps the face-to-face class in the era of COVID-19 pandemic. In United States, online classes account for around 60% in all types of classes. The proportion of face-to-face class tend to be low. In Korea, proportion of online class is highest and face-to-face classes is lowest in 3 countries. And summary of GC in 3 countries, I can say that regarding the acquisition status of GC before and after the corona pandemic, in the US and Korea, the acquisition status of GC after the corona pandemic is generally lower than before the corona pandemic. But in Taiwan, where face-to-face lessons are held, it has not decreased in general. And the secondary cross-cultural collaboration, scores of USA and Taiwan tend to be high and scores of Korea tend to be low. And third point is regarding scores of cross-cultural collaboration based on gender, scores of women tend to be higher than those of men in 3 countries. And from now on, I like to focus on Japanese experience. The experience rate of Japan is low compared to the other 3 countries before the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, it is extremely low in terms of discussions with other students, participation in voluntary student sessions, and cross-cultural exchange items. And this is a case of acquisition of GC before and after COVID-19 pandemic in Japan. Japan's average value for all items before and after COVID-19 pandemic is significantly lower than that of the 3 countries. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, there are no items with an average value of 3 or more. The acquisition of GC was significantly reduced after COVID-19 pandemic, but this case is very similar to the case of Korea. And the comparison of scores of factor analysis of GC in Japan, although the position of the 2 items, knowledge of social science and knowledge of humanities are different, they are very similar to the result of factor analysis in the 3 countries. So we name the same subscale factors. And professional practical ability, intercultural collaboration abilities, and basic cultural skills. All three factors are higher in men than in women in Japan's case. And form of class in COVID-19 pandemic in 4 countries. We compared the 4 countries. And I wanted to skip this chart because the time is so limited. And I wanted to focus on this chart only. Only lessons are rare in Taiwan, but not only in Japan. Online lessons are rare in Taiwan, but not only in Japan. Rather, the rate of fully introducing face-to-face lessons in the latter half of 2020 in Japan is higher than in Korea and the United States, which is close to 20%, because we got the guideline from the Ministry of Education after September. We are urged to give the face-to-face online face-to-face classes instead of online classes. So Japan is similar to Korea, in contrast to the United States, which offers online service regardless of scale, lectures, or exercises. In Japan, there are more face-to-face meetings than in Korea, since because we have a guideline from the Ministry of Education. And about 20% to 30% of classes that involve experiments and practice and exercise. It is not low proportions. And as a summary of Japan, I wanted to say that most of them have been educated after high school in Japan and have less experience abroad, cross-cultural exchange and collaborative learning than in other countries before the corona pandemic. The acquisition status of GC was low compared to other countries, but the probability of acquisition after COVID-19 pandemic is further reduced. And the tendency of GC acquisition and lesson style is similar to that of Korea, which also occupies an intermediate position in controlling COVID-19 pandemic. But the implementation rate of face-to-face lessons in Japan is higher than that of Korea and the United States. So in Japan, the rapid shift to online lessons may have a negative impact on the acquisition of GC. However, the result of this study show that there is a lack of overseas experience and cross-cultural exchange. We can see various problems such as lessons that are not fully linked to the learning and collaborative learning activities. So in considering the ideal educational learning environment for GC development after the corona pandemic, we not only seek ways to realize face-to-face overseas training programs and alternative measures, but also we have to realize and solve structural problems of Japanese university education. So as a challenge, we have to think about structural issues that our university education face in Japanese society. It is important to further consider the problems and the ways students learn and respond to these issues. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Reiko. So now we'd like to open Q&A for the participants if you have any questions to ask. Hi, Prof. Reiko. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, yes, nice to meet you. So any questions from the participants? You're welcome to ask any questions from, please. Okay, while waiting for the questions, Prof. Reiko, I have actually 2 questions to ask you.
Yes,
so
sure.
Thanks for such a good presentation to us. Okay, I would like to ask, my first question is why you choose this USA, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan? What is the reason behind it?
Okay, thank you very much. Because we think that it is the corona pandemic is spread all over the world. And we need to do some of the comparative studies for those kind of student acquisition of GC or something like that. And we get the funding from the JSPS for 4 years. And now we have another 5 years of funding from the JSPS. So it is important to make the framework of the research. So the Taiwan is a special one in 2020 that is more successful for controlling the corona pandemic. And United States at the point of 2020, it is not successful for controlling COVID-19 from the point of university education, because most of the universities or higher education institutions in the United States must give the online classes, not online classes for the undergraduates, also the graduate student. And Japan and Korea are positioning in the two countries, between two countries. So we can compare the situation and we can get some of the challenges or some of the good perspective from those countries.
So this means Prof. Reiko would like to take a more representative data, right?
Yeah, at that time. But now, situation is changing. The Taiwan is going backward like the United States. And the United States, many students got the vaccinations. So it is possible for the higher education institution to give the face-to-face classes right now. So to continue that kind of big surveys for 4 countries, we can get another kind of picture in the when we face the COVID-19 pandemic and the new normal situation.
So my second question is how big the sample size is each for US, or Korea?
Okay.
Yeah, may I know?
The sample size is around 3,300. Japan is we got some big sample from Japan, more than 1,000. But the United States and Korea is the same size, 824 each. And Taiwan is a little bit smaller, 600 or 20 or something like that, but not so the problem. And but in case of United States, we have more sample size from the graduate students, so a little bit different from the undergraduate student.
Thanks, Prof. Reiko. So any questions from the participants that you would like to ask? Okay, if no questions, this means we come to the end of the presentation for this section. So Sarah, so I hope everyone in this group can turn on your video. We can take a group photo. So later on, we will send you the photos through email, especially to our presenters today. Yes.
Hello, everyone.
And hi. Hi, Dr. Kai.
We would like to see your smile today. So could you on the video?
Yes, please.
Okay,
hi,
right.
Dr. Muftahu.
Hi,
Dr. Muftahu.
everyone.
Yes. Nadira, Zira, I think, yeah.
Hi, sorry, I cannot switch on my camera. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. So thanks again to Prof. Miki, Dr. Jasvir, Dr. Kai, and Prof. Reiko for such a wonderful presentation to us. We are so happy to have this opportunity to learn from all the experts here today. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, I will count until 3. I would like to see your very big smile, even though I'm wearing mask. I'm sorry for that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more. Okay. Maybe after the another time, this time, maybe you show your teeth after this. Okay. All right. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Thank you so much,
Thank
Doctor.
you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very much
Thank you,
to
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye.
For the speakers, I will send you the photos through email. Okay, thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you
Bye.
so much. Yes.
Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih
Terima kasih
banyak-banyak.
banyak-banyak.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Sarah, terima kasih banyak-banyak Sarah. Thank you so much.
Doctor, thank you.
Oh, thank you. So kita ahead of the time for 8 minutes kita.
Awesome. Awesome flow, Doctor.
Awesome, awesome. Dr. Jasvir, thank you so much, Dr. Jasvir. Habis dah. So group lain sudah siap ke?
Ada yang selesai, ada yang belum, but this breakout session have a very good flow, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I learned from my mistake.
Huh? Oh, symposium. Okay, alright.
Oh, masih. Nanti Prof post mortem ni memang kena grill habis-habis.
It's just that we will also email the QR code to the participants too, in case they didn't see the chat box. Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, bye-bye.
Doctor, we
I have
invited.
to ask something.
Yes,
I have to
Doctor.
ask something. The next session in this room, we
Yes.
have to come back at what time? 12, is it?
12:30 p.m. Yeah, Prof. Very true.
12:30, Prof.
12:30.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Prof,
Thank
dari
you.
you mana, Prof?
USM, and I'm not a prof.
Okay.
USM school mana, Prof?
Pusat Pengajian Ilmu Kemanusiaan, Humanities.
Kemanusiaan, jiran
Ah.
ni. Saya ilmu pendidikan.
Ilmu pendidikan, okay.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Tak pernah jumpa kat campus.
So I'll leave the room, and the next session is at 12:30 the
Yes.
same room. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, please.
Because I'm presenting, and then share screen. I just put up my slides.
Very true, Doctor. Very true.
Yeah,
Just the
okay.
same link and same session. Yes.
Same link, same session. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, Prof. Bye-bye. Okay, Sarah, I leave lah. I leave, ah. Thank you, thank you.